I would be vomiting, unable to go to the toilet, and in such severe pain that I would pass out and have migraines.
Today, I'm joined by Carla Cressy, the founder of the Endometriosis Foundation. It wasn't until she was 25, after years of misdiagnoses, hospital admissions, and even unnecessary surgery, that she finally received a diagnosis of endometriosis. But I'd love to go back to the moment that you realised that something wasn't quite right.
When I started my period, it was very clear that something wasn't right.
What point did it get to when someone said, look, I actually think this is something else, I think it's endometriosis?
That point actually never came.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Food Medic podcast. I'm Dr. Hazel Wallace, a women's health nutritionist and former NHS doctor, and I'm back for a special women's health series of the Food Medic podcast. In this mini-series, we're diving into all things women's health, from expert insights and myth-busting chats to mini Ask Dr. Hazel episodes, where I answer questions submitted by you. Expect accessible, evidence-backed tips to help you feel empowered, not held back by your menstrual cycle and more. Today, I'm joined by Carla Cressy, the founder of the Endometriosis Foundation, who I met on a panel a few years ago and was so inspired by her work, but also really moved by her story. Carla's journey began when she was just 14, when she started experiencing symptoms that were repeatedly overlooked. It wasn't until she was 25, after years of misdiagnoses, hospital admissions, and even unnecessary surgery, that she finally received a diagnosis of endometriosis. Carla's story sadly reflects the reality for so many, with the average diagnosis delay for endometriosis in the UK still around 8 years. But through it all, she turned pain into purpose, founding a charity, contributing to national health guidelines, and speaking up in places like Parliament and Downing Street to push for real change. This conversation is an honest and powerful look at the reality of living with endometriosis and why we need to be doing so much more. If you're enjoying these conversations and want to go beyond just understanding your hormones and your menstrual cycle and actually learn how to work with them, my latest book, Not Just a Period, is available to pre-order now. It's a practical, science-backed roadmap that helps you align your cycle in every area of your life, from nutrition and mood to body image, skin, hair, and more. If you're ready to feel more in tune with your body and supported by your hormones, rather than confused by them, I'd love for you to check it out. You might notice a QR code floating around if you're watching the video for each scan, or if you're listening to the audio version, you can find the link at the bottom of the episode show notes. Carla.
Hi.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. I've been so excited to have this conversation with you. And I mean, I know your story, but I'd love to go back to the moment that you realized that something wasn't quite right and maybe your journey to getting a diagnosis of endometriosis.
Yeah, I mean, I think like most people, I knew really early on that something wasn't normal. I have 3 sisters, so I'm one of 4 girls, and I was the only one that was kind of on all fours, doubled up in pain on my period. And I also had really irregular periods just from the off. So it was quite known very early on that I had PCOS. And so my periods were really irregular, but I also had endometriosis, which I later found out. And so I had these very irregular periods that would come kind of every 2 weeks, but they were incredibly painful. So every 2 weeks I would be vomiting, unable to go to the toilet, and in such severe pain that I would pass out and have migraines and take time off school. So really, really early on, I was 14, when I started my period, it was very clear that something wasn't right. Actually went straight to the GP, and that was kind of my life for a good 5-6 years, just back and forth to the GP, trying every hormone treatment known to man that was available, but nothing helped. And just before my 15th birthday, actually, my mum took me to see a gynecologist, and they performed an ultrasound scan. Didn't see anything and kind of sent me on my way. So really early on, really early on, and it just went on and on. And I almost feel like bored of even talking about it now, because you feel like you've said it so many times, and it's just that it is that case of just going on and on and on and trying to get that help and just not being listened to. But it wasn't until I think when I was 19, 20, and I was in my first real serious relationship, and I started to experience like bleeding during sex and such severe pain during sex that I would have to stop and burst into tears. And that's when I then had another kind of support system there to say, this isn't normal. So, my mum would join me at GP appointments. My then partner would join me at GP appointments. But we just didn't get anywhere for years. And it was always a case of going back and forth, try a different hormone pill. But also, these hormone pills didn't work for me. I never managed to kind of catch a break. And then I remember I was Googling my symptoms, irregular bleeding, pain during intercourse, pain kind of all outside of menstruation as well, because this pain was all time around at this point. The older I got, the symptoms were just becoming more and more debilitating. And I remember Googling my symptoms, and they were very similar to that of cancer. So I went to the GP, and I wasn't quite 25. I think I was 22 at the time. And I asked for a smear test. And my GP actually agreed, I think you should have a smear test. And they performed the test 3 times, and all 3 times the lab refused because of my age. So for this really kind of long time, I genuinely thought, I'm going to die. Like, this is something really sinister and no one cares. And, because you just feel like you're not getting anywhere, for help. It just went on for years. I remember I lost my first job because I just kept passing out and we didn't know what was wrong. I would go to work, and then an hour later I would be unconscious and be in the back of an ambulance. And this would happen if it's during my period week, 2-3 times in the week. And then I'd be in the hospital and having scans and nothing's seen. And it was just really, really difficult, really, really difficult time, especially when you don't have answers. And this went on, it took just over 10 years to get a diagnosis. So this just went on and on for a really long time. And during that time, my weight really dropped and I would struggle to eat, and I'd had this kind of big bloating tummy and no one knew why. And it was just so hard. And I know that I'm probably echoing so many other people's experiences as well. And eventually it was actually when my bowel just completely stopped working. And again, lost a lot of weight, couldn't hold weight, couldn't particularly eat very much because I always felt really full up. And then if I would eat, it was almost like I was force feeding myself because I would feel sick and I would feel pain from eating. And I didn't know why. And so the doctors again, you've got an eating disorder, or you're anorexic, or you just need to eat more. And it was just this horrible cycle of almost like you're going to someone for help, but they're actually pushing the blame on you and making you feel like either this isn't actually happening or you're causing it. And it was just really difficult kind of moment to just trying to get someone to listen to you because nobody would. But when my bowel stopped working, and when I say stopped working, I literally could not pass a bowel movement for 3 weeks one time. So I would be hospitalized with chronic constipation where my bowel was so kind of stuck that the stools would actually back up on themselves and start going the other way, and I'd be vomiting instead. It was awful. It was just horrendous. And that went on for about a year. But I think once the bowel symptoms started, that's when I started to be taken a little bit more seriously. But again, no one was there to kind of connect the dots because I was still having all these period issues as well. So eventually I just kind of gave up going to the doctors and started managing at home. And then there was a few A&E visits, and it was just kind of the same old thing. There were times where I probably should have been in hospital, but I chose not to because I knew what the outcome would be. I knew I'd just be given Oromorph and all these medications that were actually slowing my bowel down even more. That the doctors thought were going to help, and they weren't. So it just went on for years. It was exhausting. It cost me my career, my job, relationships. It was a really sad, lonely time.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine 10 years of experiencing that. And in that 10 years, were you given any answers or any potential diagnosis, or was it, this is just painful periods?
I got the painful period thing very early on. But my main one was incurable gastroenteritis.
Really?
Yeah. So it was like a norovirus, you know, the
Yeah.
norovirus. So if I'm not like, going to the toilet 12 times a day, which isn't normal, because I'd get backed up for so long, and then all of a sudden something would happen, or I'd have a huge pain attack, and where the endometriosis pain and cramps would be so intense it would actually get my bowel moving. So it'd almost be like a love-hate relationship with these periods. Or it would be the complete opposite, and I just cannot physically go. And that was because I had obstruction. So the incurable gastroenteritis, IBS, that was a big one. But I knew that wasn't right, because I've always been into my nutrition. And I'd always keep food diaries, and I would always eat very small and then wait and see how I reacted. And I was fine with all of the kind of IBS, don't eat this, don't eat that kind of food groups. And I knew it wasn't that. It genuinely would be anything I ate. It didn't matter what it was. It would either kind of flare me up or make me feel sick. But again, it just kind of went back and forth.
The overlap between IBS and endometriosis is such a like a common misdiagnosis, but also they can coexist. And I've seen it being misdiagnosed in the hospital when I was working within the gastro team as well, where someone's been told they've got IBS and they're sent into hospital, and then lo and behold, they actually had endometriosis.
We do find a lot of people can have endometriosis and IBS.
Yes.
But what I also found was, because when I mean, I'm jumping a little bit forward, but when I eventually got diagnosed with endometriosis and cut out a lot of the food groups that I was told to cut out, when I then started to kind of reintroduce them, or if I'd eat food with gluten in, for example, it really affected me. So then I would think, oh gosh, they were right, you know. But actually, the longer you cut all these foods out, the more they are going to affect you when you do then try to kind of bring these back in. So it was a real kind of, there was no education around endometriosis when I was diagnosed. Instagram wasn't even really a thing in 2014.
No.
So it was really a kind of a trial and error, learn for yourself. It was really, really tough, actually.
Yeah, I can only imagine, because even now, like, we hear stories of women still waiting 8 years. Like, 10 years is just obscene. What was the moment where you got the diagnosis? Like, what point did it get to when someone said, look, I actually think this is something else. I think it's endometriosis.
So that point actually never came. I had a huge, I say huge, if I was at home, I wouldn't have gone into the hospital. I would have literally just managed through it. But I was out with friends, we were having dinner, and I just had a pain attack. And before I knew it, I was on the floor, everyone was around me in this restaurant, and I was taken by ambulance. And we was actually in the city. And I was taken to a London hospital, and they told me it was gastroenteritis, sent me away. And then I went home to my mum, and she straight away, you need to go. She actually took me to the GP surgery. And I remember I was in so much pain, I couldn't even make it up the stairs. So I had to stay downstairs. I couldn't physically get up the stairs. But that was normal for me. I'd had years of that. I remember I used to crawl from the bathroom to the bedroom just to go to the toilet, because I couldn't physically stand up straight because I was just in so much pain. And I went to the GP, and first, straight away, they said, you need to go to the hospital. I went to the hospital, and they told me they thought I had acute appendicitis. So straight into surgery. And they'd done the old-fashioned kind of appendicectomy, where they kind of cut you from like the belly button to the hip. So I had this great big incision to remove my appendix in an emergency. But my appendix was still intact, and it wasn't that. So I'm in this hospital, and they've taken my appendix out, but my infection markers were really, really high. I think they're in the 70s. And I remember they said, I can't go home until they're below 6. But I was like 72, 74. I was septic. And I remember they put tubes everywhere. I had tubes up my nose, down my throat, everywhere. They couldn't get the cannulas in because I was so dehydrated. I was just really, really poorly. And there was a few touch and go moments, and there was kind of mention of all these weird and wonderful potential diagnoses that it could have been. And then I think I took a turn for the worse. I was in the hospital for about 3 or 4 weeks. I took a turn for the worse, and then I woke up and I'd had another surgery. I was kind of in and out of consciousness throughout this time. And that's when they tried to perform a keyhole surgery to look inside to see kind of what was going on. But then they quickly changed that to a laparotomy, so another incision.
wow.
So it's kind of like a cesarean excision.
Yeah.
And that's when they found that there was so much endometriosis. I had endometriomas, the chocolate cyst. There was so much scar tissue. And they just said it looked like someone had just poured cement into my pelvis. Everything was just stuck together and completely destroyed by endometriosis. So I spent obviously a little while longer in the hospital recovering. They didn't treat the endometriosis, but they did kind of do what they can. And they drained a lot of kind of like blood and just trying to get me as well as they could to get me out of there, and then referred to a specialist hospital, which I did not even know existed. I'd never heard of endometriosis before, and neither had my mum, which I thought was, crazy considering she's a woman. So that already we were kind of like, what is this? What does this mean? And then we would look for answers, and they just weren't there. There wasn't even nice guidance on endometriosis. So it was a real difficult time navigating that diagnosis. So that diagnosis kind of came by accident because they thought my appendix had ruptured. So, yeah.
And how did it feel to like finally have a diagnosis? I know that at the time it was still like there was a lot of answers. What can you actually do to help me in this situation? But was there a sense of relief?
Not really, because it made it more difficult, I think, because at that time, and still to some degree now, there was this big misconception that endometriosis is just painful periods.
Yeah.
And so when I got discharged from the hospital, they used staples to close my incision. So I had to have staples for 7 weeks. So I literally would have to be bedbound, and I couldn't lean. These staples were quite heavy duty staples. And I remember I was told to try physiotherapy while I'm waiting for my referral to the specialist hospital. And so I went ahead and I called to do the referral with my mum, and they said, oh, sorry, we don't do anything for painful periods. So I was just kind of met with this kind of block, because as soon as I said endometriosis, they would say, oh, we don't do, it's nothing. And I remember after kind of this diagnosis, my stomach would swell up. And obviously the last time that happened, I was septic and having all these surgeries. So I would go into A&E with this big swollen tummy, still quite unwell from that operation. And they would say, don't really know much about it. And it was quite a scary time because I had this diagnosis. For me, the diagnosis was quite a serious situation. It came around in a serious situation. I didn't know much about it. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what it meant for my fertility. I didn't even know at that time that it had been causing all the bowel issues as well. And then nobody was there to help. So it was really tough, really tough.
So hard. So hard. Looking back, is there anything that you would say to like your younger self who was going back and forth to the GP in and out of hospital?
It's hard because I know a lot of people say, advocate for yourself, but I did.
Yeah.
And my mum, we really did. We did not stop. And it was so difficult and funny. It was just recently I went through my medical notes, and in 2004, I think I would have been, or 2005, I would have been 13 or 14. My doctor's handwriting, it actually says, Mum worried there's something wrong. And all these bleeding and pain kind of notes written. And I think we were so active with that. We were so, we were there every 2 weeks with these symptoms. What more could we have done?
Yeah. How did your journey lead you to set up the Endometriosis Foundation? Because obviously, you've been through such a huge experience yourself, and what you've done with the foundation is incredible. So, how did you get there, and what was your vision with setting it up?
So I never planned. It was never my intention to set up a charity. I actually started by just setting up a Facebook group because I felt so alone. I didn't know anything about it. And I was blogging at the time. And I wrote a blog that was called Post Baby But No Baby. And I kind of just explained what had happened in the hospital and this diagnosis. And I remember at the end of it, I wrote, has anyone else heard of this? I had no idea what it was. And when I did Google it, it kind of just came around like this rare condition that some women might have after they've had children. And that was it. There just wasn't much information. And that a hysterectomy was a cure Obviously, we know that that's not true, but that's all the information that was available to me at that time. So it started with this online support group. And when I wrote that blog, I remember I put it out in just on Facebook. And then by the morning, I woke up to my phone going crazy, and it had been picked up by the newspapers, and it was just everywhere. And it was in Z News in India, Newsweek in America, everywhere. And it was like, woman diagnosed with rare womb condition.
Wow.
Woman nearly died. Women's organs stuck together. And I was like, what on earth is going on? But from that, I just had this influx of messages and letters from so many women from all over the world who were going through exactly the same thing. So many women who were struggling to get diagnosed or being diagnosed in such extreme circumstances, similar to me, worse. And I just was blown away. I could not believe that this kind of experience that I'd had for, at that time, the last 10 years and felt so alone. There were so many other people experiencing very similar, if not the same thing. And it just blew my mind. And this support group kind of went from 40 people to tens of thousands of people. And I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, like this is horrendous. Like, what is being done? Nothing was being done. We were all being told the same thing. It's just bad periods. Endometriosis is just a period issue. And I think that's the problem, because painful periods is a symptom of endometriosis. The condition isn't a period issue. That's just one symptom. There are so many other symptoms outside of periods that are, related to endometriosis that nobody were kind of speaking about. And it was from then that I started to kind of share my story, which, looking back, I probably wasn't in the best place to do that, but I did it. And it just kind of created more, I suppose, opportunities to meet more people that were going through it. And I just found this, from this support group, it just kind of led to this platform that just brought people together.
Yeah.
And I needed that so much, because although I had my family and my friends, it was difficult for them. It was difficult for me to kind of explain to them or express myself, but also it's difficult for them to understand, because I was 24. I just had an infertility diagnosis. I'd just been told I needed major surgery and potentially bladder, may lose a kidney and part of my bowel, and my ability to carry children, and all of these things all at once. And it was just shocking to me, and having had that quite traumatic operation, and then learning that I need to go on and have more surgeries.
Yeah.
It was really, really difficult. So it's kind of led to that, but it was never my plan. I kind of didn't have this intention of, I've just been diagnosed with this, let's set up a charity, because that was the last thing on my mind. I couldn't even go to the toilet, never mind start a charity.
Yeah.
But it just led to that. And I met so many people through the journey, and together, I mean, the charity is not just me. There's a whole pool of us that are working together and doing this together. And it's just through leaning on other people that it's creating that community that wasn't there before. Yeah.
And you mentioned something I really want to circle back to, which was that painful periods are a symptom of endometriosis, but there's many more symptoms. And I'm conscious that we didn't even talk about what endometriosis is. And within where we work, we talk about it all the time. But for a lot of people, they don't exactly know what it is. So I'd love to just kind of circle back to, what is endometriosis and what are some of the common symptoms that people might be experiencing?
Endometriosis is a systemic inflammatory hormone-driven condition where tissue that's similar to the tissue that lines the uterus, which we call the endometrium, is found elsewhere, usually within the pelvis, but it can actually be found anywhere in the body. And it can cause symptoms like painful periods or infertility. It can cause, some people might have endometriosis in their chest and their lungs, and that can cause pain, particularly during the period, chest pain, coughing up blood. There are so many different symptoms, and bowel issues, bladder issues. It can really depend where it is on the type of symptoms that you might have.
Yeah.
For example, because I had the bladder involvement, the bowel involvement, and the kind of pelvic involvement, I would have all these kind of period-related symptoms, and then the pain, and then the bladder-related symptoms, then the bowel-related symptoms, all grouped in together. And a lot of people do tend to have that. And I think that's why quite often the symptoms can be confused for other conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A very common symptom would be pain on opening your bowels or going for a wee. And I remember sitting in an endometriosis clinic as a medical student, which is quite like a unique clinic to be in. And the consultant was amazing. And he sat me down and was like, if a woman ever tells you that she's got pain on opening her bowels and it's related to her menstrual cycle, you better believe her that it's endometriosis.
Yeah.
And it's something that just stuck with me forever. But I think, again, we often don't relate the two. So it's such an important symptom. You know, your story is really common, but not just for women who are trying to get a diagnosis of endometriosis, for all women's health conditions. And I think anything that's pain related, like if we look at the research, women more often are told that their pain's in their head, are told that it's not real, it's psychogenic, and in hospital they have to wait longer to get painkillers. And I just think like your experience is like part of a wider issue that we have, that like women just aren't taken seriously. I guess my question is like, what do you think needs to happen in order for that to change?
I think it starts with education, and I think we've got a long way to go.
Yeah.
I really do. It's not a case of there's one body where you educate and then it kind of filters through, which it does in a sense, but it's going to take a really long time.
Yeah.
So I think for me, where I'm kind of positioned on the ground within that community of people like me who are going through it, educating each other and really kind of making sure we're equipped with the right information, the right guidance, and taking that to because also these relationships we have with medical professionals are so important, and they can really complement our journeys. So if you don't have that relationship with your GP or your gynecologist or your physiotherapist or your dietitian, whoever, it's going to be really difficult to get the support that you need. So not creating, but kind of developing those relationships for me is so important, and we're always kind of encouraging that through the support that we offer. And so it's not just when people are trying to get diagnosed, because from diagnosis through treatments and beyond, your GP or your team, your medical team, are always kind of involved. So it's about maintaining those relationships as well, because some people might kind of experience endometriosis and get their diagnosis and have some type of treatment, whether that be holistic or kind of medical or surgical. But then 2-3 years later, they might potentially begin experiencing issues again. And it's about, for me, it's really important to encourage people to keep that kind of that dialect with those medical professionals, so that they know what's happening with you in your life. They know if you're struggling, just to keep that relationship strong, so that they're part of your journey, because it's not a case of you got diagnosed, that's it. You know, there's a whole pool of referrals and appointments that you go to. I mean, I remember after I'd been referred to the specialist centre, again, I never knew it existed. I remember one particular week, I had like 6 appointments.
Really?
And I just thought, how am I meant to do this and work and manage home and walk my dog and have a bath? Like this was like a full-time job. And so having that relationship with your medical team, being able to be honest and be able to share what's worrying you, and also understanding that your voice is just as important in your treatment journey as well. And it's not a case of just being told what to do. It's about, what are your priorities? What are you worried about? I know for some people, they may be very, very sure that they want to have children one day. If that's a concern, make sure you speak on that and make sure that your medical team know this. And if they're not particularly welcoming of make sure the GP is involved. And just having people to fight your corner, basically, I think is how I managed to kind of get through that pathway. But again, it comes back to self-advocacy, doesn't it? Which is tiring when you're in pain.
It's so tiring. And the podcast, on this podcast, we have a lot of conversations about advocating for yourself. And I hate and I love that conversation because I wish we didn't have to. And like, that's coming from someone who's a medical professional. And I know that people have to do that, especially women in pain, especially women who have menstrual cycles, or any needs related to their reproductive health is just always passed off as it's just part and parcel of being a woman. But I think there are women who are probably listening to this podcast who are probably in your DMs who think, this might be happening to me, or at least something's not quite right. For those women, what advice do you give them?
I mean, I speak to a lot of women on a daily, and do you know what I find? A lot of people are worried to move forward and seek help because they don't think their endometriosis is bad enough. And for me, pain is pain.
Yeah.
We should never disregard it. And it doesn't mean that you're going to go to your GP and then next week you're going to be in an operation. Like, that's not what we want.
Yeah.
But you should go to your GP and you should let them know what's going on, because if it is a case, especially with endometriosis, it can be progressive. For some people, it might kind of rear up and then all of a sudden disappear.
Yeah.
Like the pain and the symptoms disappear, and this does happen.
Yeah.
Or for some people, they might find that with some small lifestyle changes or with bringing in some type of hormone therapy treatment or some kind of more holistic therapies, that's all they need.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. Because for me, and I think when we think about endometriosis and we hear, the only way to diagnose it is through surgery and the best treatment is surgery, which to some degree, and for some people, that is their route to getting relief, but not for everyone.
Yeah.
And if that's not what you want, then you don't have that. There's always a way to work around it and find what works for you. And I think just don't put that off. But one thing I will advise is to make sure you go prepared. I know it sounds really boring and you've probably heard it 100 times, but keeping a symptom diary can honestly be really, really helpful. Not only for you to know what's going on and find patterns, but also for your medical professional, for your GP, and not just for diagnosis, but for ongoing. Even still, I've had a hysterectomy, I've had a bowel surgery, I've had it all. I still keep a symptom diary because if I feel something and I think, that's strange.
Yeah.
And then that happens again, I'll have a look at how close they are.
Yeah.
And if they're kind of different. And that helps me think, okay, I think something might be going on here.
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of feeding back to your medical team, no matter where you are in your journey, to make them aware so that, touch wood, if anything did kind of progress, then you've already made them aware and you're already kind of on their radar. But also printing the nice guidelines can be so helpful in helping people get through the referral pathway, because 9 times out of 10, the biggest problem we have is people can't get past the GP. They just can't get past. They're told to try paracetamol or anti-inflammatories, which 9 times out of 10, before we go to the GP, we've already tried those things and they don't work. So it can be a real barrier to get past that first initial step. But we do find when people go and they're more equipped and they're more prepared and they have this symptom diary and they have the nice guidance and they've found a specialist centre that's close by or one that kind of makes sense to them and they want to go to, and it shows that they've done their homework, 9 times out of 10 the GP will also support that and help kind of work with you.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be like that.
No.
Unfortunately. No. And it also shouldn't take for people like me and so many other people to have to share such intimate and personal experiences to get people to take this more seriously. But unfortunately, that's the world we live in.
Yeah, that's it. But really good tips for people who are navigating that. Like, even if it's not endometriosis, it's just anything that you think that isn't quite right and you just want to get listened to. So as part of your work, you've been having like really big conversations in places like Parliament, and we've seen like the women's health agenda come out in England. So there's a lot of conversations happening. But do you or are you seeing big change off the back of those conversations?
Not really. Not yet. No, there's some incredible people and supporters in this space for
Yeah.
women's health. But I think until there is funding to support these initiatives and really help push them through, it's going to take a long time. And it's a lot of pressure and responsibility for those, particularly the smaller charities, the ones that are on the ground, the ones that are involved in people's care, grassroots charities. There's a lot of pressure on them, but again, very little financial support. So I think until there's a real kind of push in bringing women's health to the kind of forefront and prioritizing that, I think it's going to take some time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would love to finish on one question. What's one myth about women's health or hormones that you wish we could finally leave behind?
I think the biggest myth is that periods are supposed to be painful, because they're not. They're not. They're not meant to be lovely, and they are obviously uncomfortable. But we shouldn't be in pain. And it might not always be endometriosis. It could be absolutely. There's so many different, women's conditions. So I think that my main kind of throw it in the bin now, let's not talk about this anymore, is that periods should not be painful. And if they are, please get it checked out.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's fine to expect some cramping, like your body's doing something amazing, but really severe period pain or like pain that's making you take time off school or work or leaves you on the floor, on the bathroom floor because the towels are cold and that's all you can do is not something that we need to tolerate. So yeah, I love that one. Amazing. Well, thank you for your time today, Carla.
Thank you. That went really fast.
It went really fast.
Really fast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Amazing. Before we leave each other, I would love if you could just take a moment to rate the podcast, leave a review, or share it with a friend or a loved one that you think would learn a lot from this episode. If today's conversation resonated, my book, Not Just a Period, is available to pre-order now, and it's packed with practical advice to help you understand your hormones, manage tricky periods, and work with your cycle for better energy, mood, and overall health. You can grab a copy now through the link in the show notes or via the QR code on your screen. I hope you all have a great week, and thank you so much for listening.